This video will cover the second half of Chapter 8, Biopsychology, Cognitive Neuropsychology, and Clinical Neuropsychology for PSY 120, Careers in Psychology, Neuroscience, and Human Development. We're going to continue talking about bachelor's opportunities to start this part of the chapter, and then we'll conclude with graduate level opportunities. I mentioned in the last video about medical technology technologists or technicians and clinical technologists or technicians. There are some special designations, and there are so many different labels that you'll run into when you do job searches in these areas. You'll really just have to pay attention to the job descriptions to help you understand them. Some job postings will use the term medical technologist or medical technician. That's different from a profession called medical assistant, which has some educational requirements and certifications. Medical and clinical laboratories may have technicians that they specifically employ to do certain jobs within a medical context. So they may be testing biological samples and doing some diagnostic work to confirm or test for things that physicians are trying to figure out with their patients. Clinical lab technicians are going to work with biological specimens, work with blood and other kinds of biologicals in order to test for certain diseases and conditions. So, for example, if a person is complaining of pain in the joints, one test that may be run is blood tests for levels of biomarkers of inflammatory conditions. There's all kinds of tests that can be run in support of the work of medical doctors. These technologists are going to, so the difference in the labels, there you have technologists and technicians. Technologists are one step over technicians, typically in the way that those terms are used. So the technologists are going to be supervising technicians in a somewhat more management level position. So your entry level job maybe as a technician, and as you become more proficient and experienced, you may be able to move into a more supervisory role. Clinical lab technicians are going to be working with biological samples more often in order to test for diagnostic information. Pharmacy technicians and I've had one student in recent years who, after finishing their bachelor's degree, got a job working with a pharmacy and was trained on the job as a pharmacy technician. The long-term goal for this particular student was to go to graduate school, but they wanted to have a gap year and do some continued learning during that year. The student couldn't decide exactly what they wanted to do, so this was a career path that was temporary before they decided to seek an advanced degree in neuroscience. As a pharmacy tech, you can either do a degree program or a certificate program, which is becoming more desired, or you can, as my former student did, work on the job to get the training that's necessary. So what these technicians do is they verify customer information, verify insurance and prescription information, a lot of the day-to-day interactions in the pharmacy. They may also, under the supervision of pharmacists, prepare medications for patients, counting out pills, preparing bottles, putting on labels, and so forth. So if you go to a pharmacy, it's likely that the person you're actually interacting with is a pharmacy tech. If you have specific questions for the pharmacist, then they will pass you over to the pharmacist themselves. As I mentioned, there are formal pharmacy tech programs with certifications that you can seek out. And these are becoming more and more preferred. So if this is a job pathway that interests you, you may want to do some looking around on the job boards and see what kind of requirements are expected in your area. As for graduate level opportunities in this career area, academia is certainly one of the places where we find people working in biopsychology and the other areas of neuropsychology. Whether you're doing research in the area of straight up physiological psychology or in those sort of combined areas of cognitive neuroscience, academia is one of the home bases for people doing that kind of work. So the work that you would be doing if you were working in academia, and typically this would require a PhD, a doctoral level degree. You're going to be teaching undergraduate, if you're at a large university, teaching graduate students, and also doing research in your own lab. Doing research in these domains can be quite expensive. So, for example, a colleague of mine does brain injury research. That requires very sophisticated microscopy as well as having access to an animal colony. So his work is very, very dependent on securing grant funding in order to keep his research lab running. It also requires, fairly expensive equipment. Microscopy equipment can be extremely expensive, so starting those labs off can be pricey. So what if you're looking at a career in academia in this particular domain, you might want to expect that grant writing is going to be a part of your future. There are also opportunities in the private sector, particularly in pharmaceuticals and biotechnology. These can be quite lucrative careers when you are properly prepared for them. There are positions within pharmaceutical and biotech firms at the master's level as well as at the doctoral level, depending on what kind of job responsibilities you want to have. There are also opportunities within the public sector in government settings, at the federal level, but also at the state, occasionally at the local level, but not typically. What these employees are doing, they're going to be doing primary research for product development and innovation, inventing tools, techniques, products that can be used to benefit people. Psychologists who are working in this domain may also be called upon to evaluate effectiveness of products, so having really strong research skills is critically important. Finally, there are practice-related opportunities in this domain. Clinical neuropsychologists are the people who a person would be sent to if they need to have clinical diagnostic testing done to determine disability, level of dysfunction in the brain and nervous system. So, for example, if you have an older person in your life who is developing symptoms that you think might be Alzheimer's disease, your primary care provider for that person may refer your loved one to a clinical neuropsychologist for a neuropsych assessment. And what they would do is they would do some assessment to determine the person's condition, their functioning, their cognitive functioning, their emotional functioning, their behavioral functioning, using standardized tests and measurements and interviews. As your authors describe it, they also talk about the results of injuries or other kinds of damage to the brain. So if you have a stroke injury or a closed head injury or an impact injury to the brain and nervous system, a clinical neuropsychologist may be called in to examine and produce a report that provides the detail that's necessary for other rehabilitation professionals to do their jobs. These professionals, clinical neuropsychologists, are themselves, they're attracted to the field because of their interest in behavior. And in particular, looking at executive functioning, cognitive functioning, emotion, motivation, and how that translates into other sort of behavioral outcomes. These are individuals who may be part of a treatment team, who are involved in neuropsychology practices or neurology practices as part of the services that are provided in that context. Sometimes the people who are providing care in this domain are actual neurologists. Now, a neurologist is a different career. That is a medical specialty, so it would be a person with an MD or a DO who has a specialty in neurology. In their practice, they may also have clinical neuropsychologists who do the cognitive, emotional, and motivational testing and behavioral testing that gives them the details that they need to provide an appropriate treatment plan. Clinical neuropsychologists may be involved in the rehabilitation domain. So if you have a rehab hospital that works with lots of patients who have neurological injuries, say a brain injury or a stroke, an embolism, some other kind of insult to the brain, they would be a critical part of that treatment team, providing accurate assessments of baseline performance, but then also changes in performance as rehabilitation goes forward. This area of interest also relates to what's called rehabilitation psychology, which is another career area of interest. You might notice if you're searching on the APA divisions list that there is an area of rehabilitation psychology that is, relatively speaking, newer than some other divisions. Clinical neuropsychologists may find themselves to be a part of that area of interest because many of them use their abilities in assessment and testing to do to take measurements, to write reports about physical, sensory, cognitive, developmental, and emotional difficulties that people experience if they lose function due to injury or illness. And that concludes my coverage of Chapter 8.